In the days when the judges ruled, there was a severe famine in the land of Israel. It was a time of great uncertainty and hardship, as the people struggled to find food and sustain their families. In the small town of Bethlehem, nestled in the hills of Judah, lived a man named Elimelech. He was a man of noble lineage, married to a woman named Naomi. Together, they had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and despite the challenges, they held on to their faith in the God of Israel. But as the famine deepened, Elimelech made a fateful decision. He could no longer bear to see his family suffer, and so he chose to leave Bethlehem in search of better prospects. The family packed their belongings, left behind their home, and journeyed eastward to the land of Moab, a place known for its fertile plains and abundance of crops. Moab, however, was also a land with a people who worshipped foreign gods, and this move was not without its risks. The transition to Moab was not easy for Elimelech and his family. The customs, the language, and the very air of Moab felt foreign, but they persevered. In time, they began to settle into their new life. Mahlon and Chilion, now young men, took Moabite wives Orpah and Ruth. The marriages brought a semblance of normalcy and hope to the family, and for a while, it seemed that they might build a future in this foreign land. But tragedy struck when Elimelech fell ill and died. Naomi was left a widow in a strange land, far from the comfort of her people. Her heart grew heavy with sorrow, but she had to remain strong for her sons. Yet her trials were far from over. In the years that followed, both Mahlon and Chilion also succumbed to illness, leaving Naomi bereft of her husband and her sons. She was left alone with her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, who were also now widows. Naomi's grief was profound, and her heart was filled with bitterness. She had left Bethlehem full with a husband and sons, and now she was empty. The pain of loss weighed heavily on her, and the thought of remaining in Moab, a land that had taken so much from her, became unbearable. Word reached Naomi that the Lord had visited his people in Bethlehem, providing them with food. It was a glimmer of hope in her darkness, a sign that perhaps it was time to return home. Naomi gathered her belongings and prepared to leave Moab, to return to the land of her birth, where she could at least find solace among her kin. Orpah and Ruth, bound by love and duty, insisted on accompanying her. As they set out on the road back to Judah, Naomi turned to her daughters-in-law, her heart heavy with the knowledge that their prospects in Israel were bleak. She urged them to return to their mothers' homes in Moab, where they might find new husbands and rebuild their lives. Naomi blessed them, praying that the Lord would show them kindness as they had shown her. Orpah, after much weeping, kissed Naomi and returned to Moab, but Ruth clung to Naomi, refusing to leave her side. Naomi, trying to persuade Ruth, said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth, with tears in her eyes and a resolve in her heart, replied, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." Naomi, seeing Ruth's determination, said no more. Together, they continued on the road to Bethlehem, 2 women bound by love and loss, heading towards an uncertain future. As they walked, the landscape began to change from the plains of Moab to the familiar hills of Judah. The sight of the distant fields of Bethlehem brought a mix of emotions to Naomi. This was her home, yet so much had changed. The memories of her past life here flooded back. Memories of joy, of family, of a time before the famine and the loss. When Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, the entire town was stirred because of them. The women of the town whispered among themselves, "Is this Naomi?" The years of sorrow and hardship had taken their toll on her. Naomi, hearing their whispers, said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Ruth remained silent, her loyalty to Naomi unwavering. She had left everything behind, her family, her people, her gods, to follow Naomi to a foreign land. She was now in Bethlehem, a place where she was a stranger, where she knew no one but Naomi. Yet, despite the uncertainty, there was a flicker of hope in Ruth's heart. She had chosen to follow Naomi and the God of Israel, and she trusted that this choice would lead her to a new beginning. The journey from Moab to Bethlehem had been long and arduous, but Ruth's resolve had not wavered. She had chosen to leave everything she knew behind, her family, her homeland, and the gods of Moab, to follow Naomi into the unknown. It was a decision born out of love, loyalty, and a deep-seated conviction that her place was now with Naomi and the God of Israel. As they entered the gates of Bethlehem, the whispers of the townspeople echoed in Ruth's ears. She could sense their curiosity, their wonder at seeing Naomi return after so many years, and with a foreign woman by her side. But Ruth paid them no mind. Her focus was solely on Naomi, who was still reeling from the weight of her losses. Naomi, though bitter, had not completely abandoned hope. She had returned to Bethlehem because she believed that there might still be a chance for a better life, even if only a small one. But she knew that for Ruth, the path ahead would be even more challenging. As a Moabite, Ruth would be seen as an outsider, someone not easily accepted in the tight-knit community of Bethlehem. The prejudice against Moabites was strong, rooted in a long history of conflict and enmity between their peoples. Despite this, Ruth remained steadfast in her commitment. She had made a vow to Naomi and to the God of Israel, and she intended to keep it. But she also knew that they needed to survive, and survival meant finding a way to provide for themselves. Naomi was too old to work, and they had no male relatives to support them. Ruth realized that the responsibility fell on her shoulders. The harvest season was in full swing in Bethlehem, with fields of barley ripe for the reaping. Ruth, observing the activity around her, came to a decision. She would go out into the fields to glean, the practice of gathering leftover grains that the reapers left behind. It was a right granted by the law of Moses to the poor and the foreigners, but it was not without its risks. Ruth knew that as a Moabite, she might face hostility or even danger in the fields. Early the next morning, Ruth approached Naomi with her plan. "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor," she said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Naomi looked at Ruth, seeing the determination in her eyes. She knew that Ruth was taking a great risk, but she also knew that there was no other option. "Go, my daughter," Naomi replied, placing her faith in the Lord to protect Ruth on her journey. With Naomi's blessing, Ruth set out to the fields. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills of Bethlehem. Ruth walked with purpose, her steps guided by faith. As she reached the outskirts of the town, she found herself in a field where reapers were already at work, cutting down the barley and bundling it into sheaves. Ruth watched them for a moment, then humbly began her task, keeping a respectful distance from the reapers. She moved cautiously, gathering the stalks of barley that had been missed or dropped. Her movements were careful and deliberate, driven by the knowledge that every handful of grain she collected would mean another meal for her and Naomi. As the morning wore on, Ruth's presence in the field did not go unnoticed. The reapers glanced at her occasionally, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. But Ruth remained focused on her task, her heart steady with the prayer that she might find favor in the eyes of the landowner. Little did Ruth know that her prayers were about to be answered in ways she could never have imagined. Ruth worked tirelessly under the hot sun, her hands moving steadily as she gathered the leftover barley. The labor was exhausting, but Ruth's determination fueled her. She had made a commitment to Naomi, and this work, though humble, was a step toward fulfilling that commitment. Each stalk of grain she collected was a small victory, a testament to her perseverance. As the day progressed, Ruth noticed a figure approaching from a distance. The man walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the field. He was clearly of some importance, and the reapers immediately took notice, straightening up as he drew near. Ruth kept her head down, focusing on her work, but she couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze as he passed by. The man was Boaz, the owner of the field and a relative of Naomi's late husband, Elimelech. Boaz was a man of standing in Bethlehem, known for his integrity and generosity. As he surveyed the work being done in his fields, his eyes fell upon Ruth, the foreign woman gleaning behind the reapers. There was something about her that caught his attention, her diligence, her quiet resolve, the way she moved with a sense of purpose. Boaz approached the overseer of the reapers and inquired, "Whose young woman is this?" The overseer replied, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the land of Moab. She asked to glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been working steadily from morning until now, except for a short rest." Boaz nodded, his interest piqued. He had heard of Naomi's return and the story of the Moabite woman who had shown such loyalty to her mother-in-law. But seeing Ruth here, working so hard under the sun, moved him in a way he hadn't expected. Boaz walked over to where Ruth was working. She looked up as he approached, her heart skipping a beat as she met his gaze. There was kindness in his eyes, a softness that put her at ease. "Listen, my daughter," Boaz said gently. "Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Ruth was taken aback by his kindness. She had expected to be treated as an outsider, yet here was the owner of the field offering her protection and provision. She bowed low to the ground and said, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz smiled, a warm and reassuring smile. "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had taken a great risk in coming to Bethlehem, but this man, this Boaz, was showing her a kindness she had not dared to hope for. "I have found favor in your eyes, my lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. Boaz instructed her to stay close to his workers throughout the harvest, ensuring her safety and well-being. He even offered her a place at his table during the meal, where she ate until she was satisfied and had food left over to bring back to Naomi. As Ruth continued to glean in the fields of Boaz, she felt a sense of gratitude and hope begin to grow within her. She had come to Bethlehem as a stranger, but now she was beginning to feel that perhaps, in this place, she could find a new home, a place where she and Naomi could be safe, where they could rebuild their lives. Ruth returned to the fields the next day, her heart lighter than it had been since arriving in Bethlehem. The kindness that Boaz had shown her the previous day gave her hope, a sense that perhaps she and Naomi were not as alone as they had feared. As she continued her work, Ruth found herself watching Boaz from a distance, observing how he interacted with his workers, always with a firm yet gentle authority. Boaz, too, was watching Ruth. He admired her dedication and her humility, traits that stood out in contrast to the struggles she must have faced as a foreigner in a strange land. He could see that she was not only working for herself but for Naomi as well, ensuring that they both had enough to eat. At midday, Boaz called Ruth to join him and the others for the meal. As she approached, Boaz handed her a piece of bread and invited her to dip it in the wine vinegar. Ruth accepted with gratitude, sitting down among the reapers. It was unusual for a landowner to invite a gleaner to share in the meal, but Boaz had made it clear that Ruth was under his protection. As they ate, Boaz asked Ruth about her life in Moab and what had led her to follow Naomi to Bethlehem. Ruth spoke quietly, sharing her story with sincerity and honesty. She told him of her deep love for her husband, Mahlon, and the grief she felt at his death. But more than that, she spoke of her loyalty to Naomi and her growing faith in the God of Israel, a faith that had led her to make the journey to Bethlehem despite the risks. Boaz listened intently, his respect for Ruth growing with each word. He could see the strength and courage that lay beneath her gentle exterior, and he admired her unwavering commitment to Naomi. It was clear to him that Ruth was not just any woman. She was someone special, someone with a heart full of grace and determination. When the meal was over, Boaz gave instructions to his workers to allow Ruth to glean even among the sheaves and not to rebuke her. He also told them to pull out some stalks from the bundles and leave them for her to gather, ensuring that she would have more than enough to take home to Naomi. Ruth continued to glean in the fields of Boaz throughout the barley and wheat harvests. Each day, she brought home an abundance of grain, enough to sustain both her and Naomi. And each day, as she returned to the field, she felt a growing sense of gratitude toward Boaz for his kindness and generosity. As the harvest season progressed, Naomi began to notice the changes in Ruth. She saw the way her daughter-in-law's face brightened when she spoke of Boaz and how her spirits had lifted since their arrival in Bethlehem. Naomi's heart, once filled with bitterness, began to soften as she realized that perhaps, after all, the Lord had not forsaken them. One evening, after Ruth had returned from the fields with another large bundle of grain, Naomi decided it was time to speak of the future. She could see that Boaz had taken a special interest in Ruth, and she knew that he was a man of honor and integrity. Naomi also knew that Boaz was one of their kinsman redeemers, someone who had the right to redeem the land that had belonged to Elimelech and to marry Ruth to preserve the family line. "Ruth, my daughter," Naomi said as they sat together in their small home, "it is time that I found a home for you where you will be well provided for. Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." Ruth listened intently, sensing the importance of Naomi's words. There was a seriousness in her tone, a sense that this conversation was about more than just the practicalities of their daily lives. "Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes," Naomi continued. "Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Ruth's heart raced at the thought of what Naomi was asking her to do. It was a bold plan, one that required great courage and trust. But Ruth trusted Naomi completely, knowing that her mother-in-law only wanted what was best for her. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth replied, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. As the night fell, Ruth prepared herself just as Naomi had instructed. She washed and put on her best clothes, then set out for the threshing floor where Boaz was winnowing barley. The air was cool and crisp, and the stars twinkled above as Ruth made her way through the fields. When she arrived, she saw Boaz sitting down to eat and drink with his workers. She waited patiently, hidden in the shadows, until Boaz had finished his meal and lay down to rest at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, her heart pounding in her chest. She carefully uncovered his feet and lay down, waiting in the stillness of the night. In the middle of the night, something startled Boaz, and he turned to find a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Boaz was taken aback by Ruth's boldness, but he was also deeply moved by her courage and faith. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he said. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Boaz reassured Ruth that he would take care of the matter, but he also informed her that there was another kinsman redeemer who was closer in relation and had the first right to redeem. He promised to settle the issue the next day. Ruth stayed at Boaz's feet until the morning, then quietly left before anyone could recognize her. Boaz gave her 6 measures of barley to take back to Naomi as a sign of his intentions. When Ruth returned home, Naomi was waiting anxiously. As Ruth recounted the events of the night, Naomi listened with a mixture of relief and hope. "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens," Naomi advised. "For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." The morning after Ruth's encounter with Boaz was filled with anticipation. Naomi and Ruth waited in their small home, the weight of uncertainty pressing upon them. Though Boaz had assured Ruth that he would resolve the matter, There was still the question of the other kinsman redeemer, the one who had the first right to redeem Elimelech's land and, by extension, to marry Ruth. Naomi, however, was confident in Boaz's integrity and determination. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the town of Bethlehem began to stir with activity. Boaz made his way to the town gate, the place where business transactions and legal matters were conducted in the presence of the town's elders. The gate was the hub of the community, where decisions that shaped the lives of its people were made. Boaz, upon arriving at the gate, saw the other kinsman redeemer passing by. He called out to him, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." The man, curious about what Boaz wanted, obliged and sat down. Boaz then gathered 10 of the town's elders to witness the proceedings, ensuring that whatever transpired would be legally binding. With everyone assembled, Boaz addressed the other kinsman redeemer. "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." The kinsman redeemer considered the offer. The prospect of acquiring more land was appealing, and he initially expressed his willingness to redeem it. However, Boaz continued, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the deceased, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." This new information gave the kinsman redeemer pause. He realized that redeeming the land would also require him to marry Ruth, and any children they might have would inherit not just the land but the name of Elimelech's family, thereby diluting his own inheritance. Weighing the consequences, he quickly decided that the cost was too great. "I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate," the kinsman redeemer said, relinquishing his right. "You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." With that, the kinsman redeemer removed his sandal, a customary act of renunciation in Israel, and handed it to Boaz in the presence of the elders and witnesses. This act sealed the transaction, formally transferring the right of redemption to Boaz. Boaz stood before the elders and all who were gathered at the gate and declared, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." The elders and all the people at the gate responded with a blessing. "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem, through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." With the transaction completed, Boaz had not only secured the land but had also taken Ruth as his wife. It was a union blessed by the community and by God, a testimony to Boaz's generosity, integrity, and the faithfulness of Ruth. Ruth returned home to Naomi with the news, her heart filled with gratitude and joy. Naomi, upon hearing of Boaz's actions, felt her hope fully restored. The Lord had indeed provided, not only for Ruth but for Naomi as well. Boaz had gone beyond what was required, demonstrating his generosity and commitment to their family. As Ruth and Naomi prepared for the next chapter of their lives, they knew that this marriage was not just the beginning of a new life for Ruth, but also the continuation of a legacy that would one day lead to the birth of a great king. As the days passed, Ruth and Naomi began to settle into their new reality. The promise of a secure future with Boaz had brought a sense of peace and stability that had been absent from their lives for so long. But for Naomi, this security meant more than just material provision. It was also a chance to ensure that Ruth would be well cared for, not just in the present, but for the rest of her life. Naomi had always been wise and resourceful, qualities that had helped her navigate the many hardships she had faced. Now, with Ruth's best interests at heart, Naomi began to consider how she might help secure Ruth's future in a way that would bring both honor and happiness to her beloved daughter-in-law. Although Ruth had already caught the attention of Boaz and had gained his favor, Naomi knew that the situation needed to be approached with care. The customs and laws of their time dictated how matters of marriage and property were handled, and Naomi was well aware of these traditions. She also knew that Boaz, being a man of integrity, would not act outside the bounds of propriety. However, Naomi also recognized that the timing of their next steps was crucial. One evening, as they sat together in their home, Naomi spoke to Ruth about her thoughts. "My daughter," Naomi began, her tone gentle but purposeful, "should I not seek a home for you, where you will be well provided for?" Ruth looked at Naomi, sensing that there was more to her words. Naomi continued, "Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." Naomi's eyes met Ruth's, and she could see the understanding begin to dawn on her daughter-in-law's face. "Now, here is what you need to do," Naomi instructed. "Wash yourself, put on perfume, and wear your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but do not let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking." Ruth listened carefully, trusting Naomi's wisdom. Naomi explained further, "When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." The plan was bold, and it required a great deal of courage and trust on Ruth's part. By uncovering Boaz's feet and lying down beside him, Ruth would be making a symbolic gesture, a request for Boaz to act as her kinsman redeemer, a protector and provider. It was a humble yet powerful plea, one that would require Boaz to publicly acknowledge his intentions toward Ruth. Ruth nodded, her resolve firm. She trusted Naomi implicitly, knowing that her mother-in-law's counsel came from a place of love and deep understanding of the customs of their people. "I will do whatever you say," Ruth replied. That night, as the moon cast a silvery glow over the fields, Ruth prepared herself just as Naomi had instructed. She washed, put on her finest clothes, and anointed herself with perfume. Her heart raced as she made her way to the threshing floor, where Boaz and the other workers were finishing up the day's labor. From a distance, Ruth watched as Boaz ate and drank, his spirits high after a successful harvest. She waited patiently in the shadows, her eyes never leaving him. When the time was right, and the men had begun to settle down for the night, Ruth quietly approached the place where Boaz had lain down to rest. The air was cool, and the sounds of the night were all around her, the rustling of the barley, the distant call of an owl. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest as she reached Boaz's side. Carefully, she lifted the edge of his cloak and uncovered his feet. Then, with a deep breath, she lay down at his feet, waiting in the stillness of the night. In the middle of the night, Boaz stirred, perhaps from the chill at his feet, or maybe because he sensed that something was different. He awoke suddenly, startled to find a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of surprise and concern. "I am your servant Ruth," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension of the moment. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Boaz's initial surprise quickly turned to admiration as he realized the significance of Ruth's actions. She was asking him to take her under his protection, to fulfill his role as a kinsman redeemer. Boaz was deeply moved by her humility and her courage. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," Boaz said softly. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Boaz reassured Ruth that he would resolve the matter the next day, though he also informed her of the other kinsman redeemer who had the first right to redeem. He promised to speak with this man and settle the issue quickly. Before dawn broke, Ruth left the threshing floor quietly, taking care not to be seen. Boaz, ever generous, filled her shawl with 6 measures of barley to take back to Naomi, ensuring that she would not return empty-handed. When Ruth arrived home, Naomi was waiting for her, eager to hear what had transpired. As Ruth recounted the events of the night, Naomi's face lit up with hope. "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens," Naomi advised. "For the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." As the first light of dawn began to spread across Bethlehem, Boaz was already on his way to the town gate. The events of the previous night were fresh in his mind, and he knew that time was of the essence. The matter of Ruth's redemption and the future of Elimelech's lineage needed to be settled that very day. The town gate was the center of public life in Bethlehem, a place where business transactions and legal matters were conducted in the presence of witnesses. As Boaz arrived, he saw the other kinsman redeemer approaching. This man, though he had the first right to redeem the property of Elimelech, was unaware of the full implications of what that redemption would entail. Boaz called out to him, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." The man, curious about what Boaz had to say, obliged and sat down. Boaz then gathered 10 of the town's elders to witness the proceedings. These men were respected members of the community, and their presence would ensure that whatever decision was made would be recognized as lawful and binding. With everyone assembled, Boaz began to lay out the situation. Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech, Boaz explained. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. The kinsman redeemer considered the offer carefully. The acquisition of additional land was an attractive proposition, one that would increase his wealth and holdings. Without hesitation, he declared, I will redeem it. But Boaz, knowing the full implications of the redemption, continued with the necessary details. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the deceased, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. This revelation changed everything. The kinsman redeemer paused, his brow furrowing as he considered the consequences. Redeeming the land meant also taking Ruth as his wife, and any children they might have would inherit the property in the name of Elimelech's family, not his own. This would complicate his own inheritance, potentially diminishing the legacy he intended to leave to his children. After a moment of reflection, the kinsman redeemer made his decision. I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate, he said, relinquishing his right. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. With that, the kinsman redeemer removed his sandal and handed it to Boaz, a customary act in Israel to signify the transfer of redemption rights. This public gesture, witnessed by the elders and the people gathered at the gate, confirmed that Boaz was now the rightful redeemer. Boaz stood before the elders and all those present, his voice clear and strong as he made his declaration. Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. The elders and the people responded with a blessing, their voices filled with joy and approval. We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. With the transaction completed, Boaz had secured both the land and the right to marry Ruth. It was a moment of triumph, not just for Boaz, but for Ruth and Naomi as well. The legacy of Elimelech would continue, and Ruth, the Moabite widow who had shown such faithfulness and courage, would now have a secure and honorable place in the community of Bethlehem. Boaz wasted no time in fulfilling his promise. He went to Ruth and informed her of the successful outcome at the town gate. Ruth, who had spent the morning with Naomi, waiting anxiously for news, felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over her as she heard Boaz's words. Naomi, too, was overjoyed. The bitterness that had once filled her heart was replaced with a deep sense of gratitude. She had lost so much, but now, through Ruth and Boaz, she had been given a new hope, a future that she had not dared to imagine. Boaz and Ruth were soon married in a joyful ceremony that was celebrated by the entire community. It was a union blessed by God and honored by the people of Bethlehem. Ruth, who had once been a foreigner and a widow, now found herself embraced by a new family, her loyalty and love rewarded with a place of honor and respect. Naomi, who had once believed that the Lord had dealt bitterly with her, now saw the full circle of God's providence. Her heart swelled with joy as she watched Ruth and Boaz begin their life together, knowing that through them, the legacy of her family would continue. The people of Bethlehem rejoiced, for they could see that the Lord had blessed Boaz and Ruth. And so, the story of Ruth, the Moabite woman who had come to Bethlehem with nothing but her faith and loyalty, became one of the most cherished tales of God's redemption and grace. The morning after Boaz had secured his right to marry Ruth, the air in Bethlehem was filled with anticipation. The events at the town gate had not only resolved the legal matters, but had also set the stage for a union that would be remembered for generations. However, before the celebration could fully take place, the formalities of the transaction had to be properly concluded. Boaz, ever the man of integrity, ensured that every detail was handled according to the customs and laws of Israel. He returned to the town gate, where the elders and witnesses from the previous day had gathered again. The atmosphere was one of solemnity mixed with joy, as everyone knew that what was about to be finalized was not just a matter of land and marriage, but a profound act of redemption that would impact the entire community. The elders, who had witnessed Boaz's declaration of intent to redeem the land and marry Ruth, were ready to formalize the agreement. The other kinsman redeemer, who had relinquished his right, was also present to confirm his decision. The transaction would be made public, ensuring that there was no question about its legality or its importance. Boaz stood before the assembly, his presence commanding respect. He held the sandal that had been handed to him the day before, the symbol of the transfer of rights. With the witnesses watching, Boaz lifted his voice to speak. "Today," Boaz began, "you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property that belonged to Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. In addition, I have taken Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." The elders nodded in approval, their expressions reflecting the gravity and joy of the moment. One of the elders stepped forward, representing the group, and spoke a blessing over Boaz and Ruth. "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman. May your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." The words of blessing echoed through the gathering, filling the hearts of all present with a sense of fulfillment. Boaz had not only fulfilled his duty as a kinsman redeemer, but had also demonstrated his deep commitment to the values of justice, mercy, and love that were central to their faith. With the transaction legally and publicly confirmed, Boaz returned to Ruth and Naomi to share the news. Ruth, who had been waiting with a mixture of hope and anxiety, felt her heart swell with emotion as Boaz recounted the events at the gate. The knowledge that she would now be Boaz's wife, that she would have a secure place in his home and in the community, was overwhelming in its beauty and grace. Naomi, too, was deeply moved. She had seen God's hand in every step of their journey, from the moment they had left Moab to this very day. The bitterness that had once clouded her heart was now fully lifted, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude and joy. Her family's name, which she had feared would be lost forever, would now be preserved through Ruth and Boaz. The wedding of Boaz and Ruth was a joyous occasion, celebrated by the entire community. The people of Bethlehem, who had watched Ruth's journey from a foreign widow to a beloved member of their society, rejoiced with her. The union was seen as a testament to God's faithfulness and the power of love and loyalty. As Ruth became Boaz's wife, she found herself embraced by a new family and a new future. The fears and uncertainties that had once plagued her were now replaced by a deep sense of belonging. She had come to Bethlehem with nothing but her faith and her love for Naomi, and now she was blessed with a husband who honored and cherished her, and a community that accepted her as one of their own. The people of Bethlehem continued to speak the blessing over Boaz and Ruth, invoking the names of Rachel and Leah, the matriarchs of Israel. They prayed that Ruth, like these women, would be fruitful and that her descendants would bring honor and blessing to their people. It wasn't long before those prayers were answered. Ruth conceived and bore a son, a child that would become a source of joy not only for her and Boaz but also for Naomi and the entire town of Bethlehem. The birth of this child was seen as a sign of God's continued favor and the fulfillment of his promises. Naomi, who had once believed that her life would end in sorrow, now held her grandson in her arms, her heart overflowing with happiness. The women of Bethlehem, who had once whispered in sympathy for Naomi's plight, now celebrated with her, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Naomi named the child Obed, which means servant. This name reflected the child's role in the family and in the continuation of Elimelech's lineage. Obed would grow up to be the father of Jesse, and Jesse, in turn, would be the father of David, the greatest king Israel would ever know. Thus, the story of Ruth, the Moabite woman who had left her homeland to follow Naomi and embrace the God of Israel, became intertwined with the history of the nation itself. Her faith, loyalty, and love not only redeemed her family, but also played a crucial role in God's plan for his people. The story of Ruth, which began in sorrow and uncertainty, ended in joy and fulfillment, leaving a legacy that would echo through the ages. Ruth, the Moabite woman who had come to Bethlehem with nothing but her faith and loyalty, had now become an integral part of the lineage of Israel, a lineage that would lead to the greatest king the nation would ever know, King David. As Ruth and Boaz raised their son, Obed, the people of Bethlehem marveled at the way God had woven their lives together. Obed grew up surrounded by the love and wisdom of his parents and the nurturing presence of Naomi. From an early age, he learned about the sacrifices and the steadfast faith that had brought his family to this point. He was taught the stories of his ancestors, not just as history, but as a living testament to God's faithfulness. Naomi, who had once feared that her family's name would be forgotten, now saw her legacy preserved through Obed. Holding her grandson in her arms, she knew that the Lord had truly restored her life. The child she had thought she would never have, the continuation of her family line, was now a reality. The women of Bethlehem often remarked on how the Lord had blessed Naomi through Ruth, who had proven to be more valuable to her than 7 sons. As Obed grew, he became known as a man of character, much like his father, Boaz. He would go on to have a son named Jesse, and Jesse would father David, the shepherd boy who would become king. David's reign would be marked by the same qualities that had defined Ruth and Boaz: faithfulness, integrity, and a deep trust in the Lord. Through David, the promise of a greater kingdom would be fulfilled, a promise that pointed forward to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Ruth's legacy was not just in the physical descendants she left behind, but in the example of faith and loyalty that she embodied. Her story was passed down through generations as a powerful reminder of God's ability to redeem even the most challenging circumstances. It showed how a single act of faith, Ruth's decision to follow Naomi and the God of Israel, could change the course of history. The people of Bethlehem never forgot the story of Ruth. Her life became a symbol of hope for those who faced difficult times, a testimony to the fact that God's plans are often greater than we can imagine. Her legacy was one of love, faith, and redemption, a legacy that would ultimately lead to the birth of the Savior of the world. In the end, Ruth's story was not just about a Moabite widow who found a new life in Israel. It was about the power of God's grace, the importance of faithfulness, and the way in which God can use the most unlikely people to accomplish his purposes. Ruth, who had once been a foreigner in a strange land, became a mother in Israel and a key figure in the lineage of the Messiah. And so, the story of Ruth, the woman of noble character, continues to inspire and encourage those who hear it, reminding us all that God's love knows no bounds and that he is always at work, even in the most difficult of circumstances, to bring about his good purposes. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave your like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.